So we're at the top of the hour. Hello, everyone. My name is Akila Sriram, and I work on the marketing team here at OSG Analytics. Welcome to our webinar, Navigating the Future of MedTech with Advanced Technology, with our wonderful speakers from different MedTech organizations. We'll get started in a couple minutes. I just wanted to take some time to point out a couple of housekeeping things. So I launched a poll to kind of get a gauge for why people are tuning into today's webinar, to see what you're getting out of it. There's also Q&A functionality in Zoom. So if you have questions for the speakers throughout the webinar today, you can put them in the Q&A and then you can upvote each other's questions. And at the end, we'll hopefully get a chance to cover a couple of them with the speakers. In the meantime, put where you're tuning in from in the chat, and then Kristen from the sales team and I will be monitoring the chat and answering any logistical or other questions about the webinar today. So I hope you enjoy. And we'll get started. David, could you please introduce our speakers today?
Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Very excited about today's webinar. Very excited about this discussion. So glad everyone was able to join. Today we're going to be talking about advanced technology, navigating the future of MedTech with advanced technology. And we've got some great speakers, guests today to join us for the discussion. Myself, I'm David Levine. I lead our MedTech team here at OSG. We're focused on understanding how customers make decisions in order to predict the future needs of those customers, whether that's for innovation or for commercial strategy and execution. So we spend a lot of time thinking about the future, particularly as we're now enabled to do so much more with this types of advanced technology. We're really excited to speak with our team who are also engaging in this advanced type of technology on a day-to-day basis. Riddhit, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much, David. And thank you to the OSG Analytics team for putting this together and bringing us all together to have this conversation. My name is Riddhit Mitra. I serve as the Director of Global Product Management for Smith & Nephew Robotics and Digital Surgery. I'm happy to be here and speak about how robotics has been introduced into the market spaces and how it has evolved over the last decade or so. And look forward to speaking with Kelly and Stephanie and you, David, to talk about where we see the future going.
Thanks so much, Riddhit. And we also have Kelly Sager.
Hi, everyone. I am the Vice President and General Manager of a new business unit at Beckman Coulter Diagnostics called Clinical Decision Support Solutions, CDS Solutions. So I'm going to be speaking more from the perspective of a company that's working to leverage the power of machine learning and AI in order to develop solutions for clinicians.
Thanks, Kelly. And we have our own Stephanie Menard.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Menard. I am currently Vice President of Business Development over at OSG. I've been here going on about 6 months. My previous role, I spent 11 years as a medical sales rep and also a key account manager in marketing over at Philips. And that's where I sold a variety of devices in sleep and home respiratory, as well as diagnostics. And so I'm looking forward to speaking about advanced technology and AI.
Fantastic. So broadly, for the agenda today, we're going to start with a little bit of where the state of technology is today and looking at the market as it stands. Then we're going to talk about the business implications, what it looks like from a commercial perspective, bringing these solutions to market. And then we're going to think a little bit about the future as well. As we go, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. Akila and Kristen will be looking at that and summarizing those for us at the end. So please ask anything, have some discussion amongst yourself, and we'll look forward to answering those questions as we go. But let's start the discussion with Riddhit. How does advanced technology play into your role today?
Yeah, thank you, David. If you look at the space of medical technologies, I specifically have spent the last decade working under the umbrella of robotics and advanced technologies that help in the orthopedic space specifically. If you think about what the clinical needs exist in the market space, there are a lot of patients who undergo knee surgeries and hip surgeries, and they're relatively great procedures to undertake. However, there are about 20% of patients who still experience dissatisfaction after these procedures. So over the past 20, 25 years, technology has really evolved to work with clinicians, to work with surgeons, to help them be more precise and accurate in the intraoperative elements of what they do during surgery. And so where robotics really comes in is brings in that specific data point in the operating theater for surgeons to be more analytical in the approach of when they do surgery, to have more confidence in that what they're planning and what they're executing is really matching up. And so that's the world in which we play from an industry perspective, is providing solutions that can help surgeons be pragmatic right in the operating theater as they provide care for their patients.
Excellent, excellent. What about you, Kelly?
So in my role and my team, we're working to leverage advanced technology in the form of AI and ML. We're working to look at how we can take advantage of some of these new machine learning technologies in order to help improve care for patients. And if you think about, physicians today, they have a lot of technology at their disposal, sometimes so much that it can be overwhelming. How can we make it easy for them? How can we do a better job of rapidly synthesizing large amounts of data to help them make decisions faster, help to improve diagnosis of certain diseases, or even predict the onset of diseases? So that's what I'm working on.
Excellent, thank you, Kelly. And Stephanie, I know you had a very hands-on face-to-face role as it related to advanced technology. Can you share that with us?
Sure. It's kind of piggybacking off of what Kelly said. We have some advanced technology that I previously worked with that, the big driver was to increase clinical outcomes and increase productivity and reduce ROI. And what it did was it replaced the actual technologist. And so we're using AI and technology to diagnose and come with clinical diagnoses and outcomes, better outcomes, by removing the human, that subjective point of view a little bit, and using an algorithm that's based on, a clinical diagnostic information that is validated. And so all in all, the doctors end up saving money. We get diagnoses out earlier, and it actually helps the patient be diagnosed quicker, and it helps the doctor be able to use this product in a timely manner, get the patients in and out.
Great. So, Riddhit, now you mentioned kind of the clinical needs and the history of how robotic surgery has really changed what clinicians are able to do from a precision perspective. As you see emerging technology, emerging spaces in your field, what are the areas you see impacting healthcare professionals and patients going forward?
Yeah, that's such a great question, David. Again, if you look back at time over the last few years, robotics has really started penetrating the market space from an orthopedics perspective. And a few years even before that, in the soft tissue surgery world, robotics really came in and penetrated the market because there was real value that was derived from these procedures. And the value was that there was more predictable outcomes that surgeons were able to bank upon and have the confidence upon. And we're seeing a very similar trend in the orthopedic space. What's very interesting now is that allows surgeons to get a lot more intraoperative data that wasn't available before, because robotic systems are essentially computer systems that is giving a sense of real-time data collection in the aspects of what the surgeon is doing in the operating theater. And now what this gives us the ability to have is understanding of what real-time decisions surgeons are making from a personalized care perspective, because they know specific to that patient what the disease is, what the kinematics might be, what the specific needs of that patient are. And utilizing that to the work that Kelly and Stephanie are talking about, which is using artificial intelligence, machine learning for the preoperative diagnostics, the postoperative recovery and the outcomes, but also tying in what exactly was done personalized to that patient, I think holds immense possibilities and opportunities as we look towards the future of advanced technologies in the operating theater, ultimately to bring value to both clinicians and patients, to drive, as Stephanie mentioned, a better ROI and value-based care.
Excellent. So it sounds like in being able to leverage the advanced technology, there's this compounding effect of how much more that advanced technology is able to do.
Exactly.
Very exciting. And Kelly, I think that's something you see in your area. I know it's a lot of that is enabled by the past several years of advances in technology. What do you see as the emerging areas?
Yeah, well, exactly. The past decade, couple decades have created this, rise of electronic health records, and this really mountain of data now exists. And so now kind of the next phase in, technology adoption journey is everyone trying to figure out what do we do with all this data that has been created. The robotic systems are capturing a lot of automated data. There's a whole bunch of different smart devices out there capturing data. Now everyone's putting data into electronic health records. This opens up a lot of opportunity for artificial intelligence. And so now we're able to figure out how do we help the clinicians actually make some sense of this data, get value from this data. I went on a visit to a US emergency room just a few months ago, and the ED physician there was telling me in an ideal world, he would sit down and review the complete medical history of every patient that walks in the door, because the data is all there at this point, it all exists. But the unfortunate reality is he just does not have time to do that when there's a waiting room full of patients waiting to be seen. This is where we can leverage the power of machine learning to rapidly synthesize all of this data and then serve up the things that he should be looking at. Take a look at XYZ. We think this could put the patient at high risk for such and such disease. So there's a real opportunity now. I just attended a conference in New York City yesterday on healthcare AI, application of AI in healthcare. And it was all about this, all the data has now been created. How do we do more with it?
Mm-hmm. And you said something interesting there, Kelly. You said that serve up the information that's valuable. I think when I hear clinical decision support, the thing that comes to mind is telling me what to do, telling me as a clinician what is the next step I should take. But you're framing it more as giving me the information that's valuable among the sea of information that exists. Do you think that's more appealing to clinicians? Do you think there's going to be a greater receptivity to the direct guidance? What are your thoughts on giving the information versus giving the guidance?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, this is something that we have to be cognizant of. Physicians are the experts in their clinical judgment. That's what they've honed and refined over many years. It's not the intention to, for a computer to ever replace them. And so finding ways to communicate the value that we can offer without, making it threatening, I think is really important. And I believe, framing it up as a helpful tool in their tool belt, rather than a decision-making tool that's going to kind of replace them, is the right way to frame it up. Because really, that's what we're going for here. There's never an intention to replace physicians. The intention is just to make their lives easier. And if they had all the time in the world to review in detail all this data, they would find all the things that are important. But given the time crunch, can we optimize a little bit? Can we pull things up? And that's, how the imaging field, imaging was one of the first fields to really take advantage of AI. And it was never intended to be a replacement for a radiologist. It was just there to kind of highlight things that the radiologist could look at to speed up, reading of exams. It's, same in the rest of the healthcare industry is how can we just make their lives easier? How can we make their, speed faster, get them to decisions faster?
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Riddhit, do you see similar goals in your area as you're now pushing the boundaries of what you're previously able to do with increased precision by learning and by taking that data and advancing further? How do you think about that kind of tension between guidance versus more prescriptive action? Or is there another dimension you think about?
No, David, I couldn't agree with Kelly more than what she, how she explained how AI really plays in. It's really, if you think about our clinicians and our healthcare providers, they're provided with so much information in today's day and age that passing through it is time. And time is one of the costliest things, if you think about it, as you're planning to serve a patient from that perspective. Taking the example that Kelly gave about imaging systems, as you think about the cost to imaging, there is a person who has to diagnose that imaging, has to, and it's not one, right? You have a radiologist who then goes to the clinician. They all have to make decisions that come together for that particular patient. So anything that artificial intelligence, computational powers can do to reduce that time to get to the decision quicker, which ultimately the decision is still in the hands of the healthcare provider, makes the whole episode of care more, more streamlined. And ultimately that leads to a better return on investment or the cost efficiencies of what you're spending to provide that care and how much time you have. And it really boils down to that ease of surgery. So I really believe that as information flows in, and the quicker we can make decisions preoperatively, as well as intraoperatively, with relevant data that you're looking for, and then execute to it. And that's where I think, as we look at data with robotics, where I truly believe robotics is in the journey of becoming a standard of care, because any other industry that you look at where automation has stepped in, the industry's never looked back, So, but in that world of automation, you want technology to be smaller, more ubiquitous, but giving the surgeons the relevant information to take those decisions to make lives easier.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I know, Stephanie, this was something you saw firsthand at, as you bring this automation to practice, you were actually replacing a previously clinical role, though. What was the impact that you saw?
Sure. So we basically had a lot of our devices were connected, and that's one thing that I've noticed. Connected care and connecting the patient with the physician with the clinician was really, really big. So a lot of our devices actually had Bluetooth technology built into them, where it would connect to the physician. And so these were respiratory assist devices, things like home ventilators for people who, needed them to stay alive. And so we had a software that was also connected to the physicians and the clinicians that oversaw the respiratory therapist, is what I'm trying to say. And it would alert these respiratory therapists and the physicians when the patient was, had a low oxygen rate, or, they had any flagged indicators that something, problematic was going on. And it would, we were getting to the point where it was going to go into an app, so it actually reduced, in-home visits. It reduced the fact that the patient had to come into the physician's office. The physician was actually able to, physician was actually able to manipulate some settings via Bluetooth, via the software program. So overall, the connected care and these advanced devices really make it a lot easier for both the patients and the clinicians and physicians.
So it sounds like there's a lot more connectivity out there already, providing a lot more information and a lot more opportunity for feedback loops to automate those things, to provide the right types of information coming from more sources. Kelly, is that something that you're able to leverage? Are you able to kind of look across the whole landscape of the different data coming out there, or is that still a limitation at this point?
No, I mean, I think the nice thing is where we've evolved to today is that, nearly all smart devices are feeding their data into the electronic health records. And so, and then with the, CARES Act, now the EHR vendors are really opening up to support even more interoperability than ever before. And so there's a nice opportunity now to kind of take advantage of that for building new innovations.
That's great. So thinking about some of the commercial implications, I'm hearing from all of you that there's a lot of cost efficiencies associated with this type of technology, that yes, there's precision for the clinicians, and I'm sure there's a lot of clinical benefits. But it sounds like there are just a tremendous amount of economic benefits to using this technology. As you think about commercializing these solutions and and marketing them, are institutions receptive to those types of arguments? Are you or benefits? Are you talking more about the clinical benefits? What does the commercial execution tend to look like for solutions like these? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, this is a great question, David. And I think, once we look at where we stand in the market space today, I think we are right at the very genesis beginning stages of bringing into the forefront even robotics or digital technology solutions, and how it adds value. We have had publications that have come out showing, how it impacts, firstly, the clinical outcomes, and secondly, the economics of providing care. But these technologies do come with a cost. There's cost of development, cost of deployment, cost of sustenance. And so it's a different paradigm to think about, how you associate the value of these technologies and how, reimbursements and other such elements work around it. And those conversations have already started in the industry. And there are elements that look at how advanced technologies should be leveraged and could be leveraged in the healthcare space. When we think about robotics, oftentimes people think about how expensive capital equipment can be. However, when you look at the entire episode of care over a period of time, it really shows that if you are able to reduce revision rates for surgery, if you're able to reduce the 90-day readmission rates, which there are, again, publications around these technologies, which is what's driving the utilization of such technology. And specifically, as we look at data and data solutions, I think we can look at the world in the terms of hardware and software that powers this hardware. And software is going to keep getting smarter and smarter with the types of work that we continue to do in AI, machine learning, to make decision-making quicker. And as that continues to evolve, I think it's going to lead to a shift of just product-based pricing models to more of a value-based care model of what's the value that you're driving for the care system from that perspective.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And do you see challenges in the present if the software continues to get smarter, but the hardware is already purchased, maybe on a capital basis? Have you been seeing signals that making it easier to continue to capture more value for the added value you're able to continue to create over time through the software?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. In this world, it's always been that way, right? Now, even hardware will have a life cycle management behind it. But once the hardware is there and software elements keep coming in, as Stephanie mentioned, they get more and more connected. The value goes beyond just the hardware that you have, and so that's where I think even hardware iterations over the past couple of decades has become quite fast, in the medical device field. And of course, it goes through regulations, and we want to make the right products that are safe and effective. But even in that world, I think product design and product design iterations have become quite quicker, thanks to advanced technologies in that field too.
Mm-hmm. So it's everything. Everything is having a faster cycle time. Everything is getting smarter. Everything is getting better. And there's a growing acceptance that, value created should translate into value captured. What are your thoughts on the commercialization aspect, Kelly? What are you seeing as impactful and necessary for successful adoption of these technologies?
Well, when you're introducing something that is truly new, like some of these really new technologies, one challenge that companies, vendors face in bringing this to market is that there's no budget line item for such a thing. And so there's a very high bar in being able to explain the value and having really strong ROI data. However, that can be really difficult in the early days, before you've really had a chance to generate a lot of that economic evidence. And so that's always, a tricky balance, is figuring out how can you, as quickly as possible, put together some studies that are going to give you economic endpoints in order for you to have that ROI conversation with the customer. Already just, COVID has really kind of raised the amount of scrutiny that everyone's under to really help hospitals, save money and figure out how to be more, operationally effective. Put that together with then introducing a brand new to the world technology, it just means that there's going to be a huge focus on economic value. You need to be prepared for, telling that story and having that conversation.
Does it change the call point? Does it change how the discussions work? What have you seen in that regard?
I've seen, and this is really kind of going back more to, previous roles where I have also, been introducing new to the world technologies. It definitely makes the CFO and the finance department in the hospital a bigger stakeholder in helping to understand how to justify this increased cost, adding in a new line item for such a thing that never existed before. That adds time to the sales cycle, and we're seeing in value analysis committees a much bigger focus on the ROI component.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, given that these technologies are supporting clinicians, but also there can be some tension there as well, do you find that you're more often gaining a clinical champion and selling it upward, or more gaining a economic champion and implementing it downward?
In my experience, you always have to start with the clinical champion. If the clinicians don't want this, then the conversation is going to go nowhere. So definitely got to start there and helping the clinicians see why this could help them. But then along the way, as you're trying to get buy-in from all the diverse set of stakeholders that are going to need to buy into this, the financial aspect is going to be really important as a follow-on.
Stephanie, what was your experience actually having conversations with clinicians about a tool that has an economic impact primarily and really shifts how their practice is operating?
Yeah, that's a great question. There was a couple types of programs that we had and devices. One of which that I can remember clearly having the conversation with some of the clinical team that were absolutely opposed to it. They didn't feel like the robotics or the algorithm, the AI, was good enough. They felt like their interpretation was much better, and so the adoption from the clinicians was it was really hard to get their buy-in. And so then not having their support, having to go over to the physician and present not only the clinical data behind it, but also the financial portion of it, because ultimately that's whose bottom line, if it's his own practice or his own IDN, that type of thing, then ultimately that's his bottom line. And so showing the clinical data behind how this works, and then also the financial data. I had some tough relationships with some of the clinicians that I sold these products to. They were not happy. It soured some of our relationships, and it caused some problems, and we lost some business. But ultimately, in the end, we really helped the patients and the physicians, with getting, adding to their business portfolio and really helping them afford and advance their care.
Mm-hmm. And given that it was a successful product, generally it was an effective product, what do you think was most challenging for physicians that really failed to be won over by the technology? Sometimes it was they were a little old school. A lot of the physicians I dealt with were not used to embracing a lot of technology. They're, they're still writing in their patient notes and using dictation. And I'm sure a lot of physicians still do that, but they relied a lot on their people and their technologists to use the data and they're subjective, they train these people. And so they thought, the same thing, the algorithm wasn't good enough, my people are much better. And so trying to get them to embrace that, we really had to throw out the numbers, and how much this would save them, and the output that they'd be able to increase with. But it also sounds like to achieve that economic benefit, they really needed to let go of their support staff, and it sounds like the support staff was providing value outside of the diagnosis, that if the tool can provide a diagnosis just as well or perhaps better than the individual, they can be replaced in that objective dimension, but the subjective components in that relationship and the other value they provide may go above and beyond that. And it sounds like maybe there was some regret in replacing team members that were valuable beyond what the tool was able to replace.
Right, exactly, correct.
Mm-hmm. So that's a challenge where, exactly how you're realizing those economic values from those technologies. Are they achievable? Are they able to hit your bottom line if it requires replacing people whose value extends beyond that, or you're not really able to replace because of their other responsibilities? I think that's a challenge with many of these advanced technologies. Thinking about challenges to adoption and ways to overcome them, Riddhit, what have you experienced in that regard? The challenges of getting individuals to adopt these newer technologies?
Yeah, I'm going to actually piggyback off of where Stephanie started. When you introduce new technologies, there is always an adoption curve, right? As to it's new, it's changing what I do on a daily basis, and especially in the medical field, the clinicians, the industries, we are creatures of habit. And when you try to change a habit or change a behavior, you really have to showcase, what is the emotional, physical, economic benefit that I get by changing this behavior, because there is going to be learning to what you have to adopt to. And I think that has been one of the challenges that existed in the early days of penetrating the market with technologies such as robotics, because it comes with a change of behavior, essentially. So there was definitely a lot of emphasis and effort put in supporting the growth of this technology that comes along with just providing the technology. And along with that, generation of evidence, like Kelly and Stephanie mentioned, and evidence both on the clinical front as well as the economic front. And ultimately, once clinicians and support members understood the value it can bring in, it really grows and expands your thought process beyond just a single procedure that this robotic system supports into multiple applications and indications that it can support. So if you're doing orthopedics today and sports medicine tomorrow, or extremities, having that scalability helps in the understanding of economically. If we're seeing that we're optimizing the cost of care, optimizing the time taken for the continuum of care with orthopedics, you can then associate that with other procedural peripherals that's being operated on in the hospital and ASCs, and that starts opening up different value streams. And then when you bring that back with the data connectivity from the preoperative, postoperative, and patient optimization, we are really talking about certain things of information that just can help really change how we look at the value provided through these procedures for our surgeons. But those are things that will need a lot of support as new technologies are introduced into the market with relevant data that changes the perception of why is my life going to get better with the utilization of these solutions.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm hearing there's something of a flywheel effect, right? With evidence, you're able to win some people over, and the more you use this approach, the more it penetrates, the more evidence is generated, the more applications are identified, the better the technology, and growth accelerates that way. When you think about capturing those early adopters, I think you highlighted that there are people who are more receptive at that early stage. How much of success is identifying the right people to begin the process versus other steps you can take to kind of bring the barriers down and pull people along?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the industry is very peer-based. You're always in conferences where you're relying on your industry peers or your clinical peers to showcase the value that they see in their practice. So critical to identify the early adopters, right? You will have people who are willing to make that change, willing to work with something very new. It comes with challenges, not just that I'm adopting something. It might take me a little more time in the beginning, but it's the pioneers in the industry and and the reason why they do this, David, is because they know they inherently see that there's something missing. Otherwise it wouldn't penetrate into the market. Whether it's robotics or AI in imaging, there is definitive value streams that inherently, clinicians know that we can do better in this industry. So it's identification of people who want to work towards that, and we have lots of pioneers, I would say, out there in the industry.
Mm-hmm. So it's great. It's recognizing the people who recognize the need and are willing to experiment. And these people are visible. And these are not limitless industries. These are communities you can be in touch with. And you can begin that flywheel effect through reaching out to the right members of the community, which you're probably in touch with already. I think that's a really important point. Kelly, what have you experienced in terms of barriers to adoption and how you've overcome them?
Well, I agree with Stephanie and Riddhit that change management is really kind of a critical issue to getting adoption of something that's really new and making sure that you plan for it. I would just add, I think it's also important to make sure you're thinking about how to give something of value to each stakeholder. So, bringing it down to the individual clinician level, you might be delivering fantastic cost savings for their leadership, but an individual nurse isn't really going to care so much about that. So how can you make sure you're offering value to that person? How can it make individual clinicians' life easier? And then how can you close the loop, helping clinicians to understand that value? Hospitals can purchase technology and then clinicians can just refuse to use it. So having a way that you're going to be with them every step of the way, kind of through those initial months, helping them to realize the value that's there, is really important. And then making sure then that you have, the ability to demonstrate that value back to the leadership teams and kind of all the kind of executive stakeholders as well. So, thinking about, what's your change management plan for each type of stakeholder? The individual clinicians, making sure that they'll first of all buy into using it, and you help them, through that process, figuring out how are they going to modify their protocols in order to incorporate the use of your tool, and why should they do that? And then thinking about, once you get them bought in and using it, then how will you take the results and show their leadership team that this is really working and going to result in those cost savings?
That's really interesting. So these are tools that offer an institutional benefit, but because they have to be executed down at the clinical level, if they're not also offering a benefit to those clinicians, they may not be realized at all. And even if they are realized, there may not be any visibility or observability of those benefits back to the financial leaders if you're not able to provide that also. So really it is broad communication of benefits, of the vision of the benefits, but also the realization of those benefits are both critical. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Making sure that you plan for that and don't just dump the technology on them and say, okay, you're live now, great, have fun, but being with them on that journey.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Stephanie, what barriers did you see in particular in trying to roll out a solution like this?
One of the biggest barriers was the cost, because a lot of these devices who have some of this AI technology built into it is an added cost. And sometimes the software that goes along with it does cost with the licensing, and that's not reimbursable. And so the doctors and the CIOs, CFOs, and the people who are in charge of, the budgeting realize, okay, what is going to be our return on investment on this? And so, one of the things that's really, really important, and when conveying this, is having a great understanding of how this impacts their daily life, and almost breaking it down by reducing costs. Like, this will save you, 3 hours a day, and thus reducing your cost by X amount a years. And you really have to break it down into something tangible so they can see how this will benefit them and even their patients. And so I found that was a huge barrier is the financial portion of it, because it wasn't reimbursable and there was a big cost up front.
Mm-hmm. It's a hard cost. It's a new cost. It's an unplanned cost, and it's one that isn't often immediately directly offset by something else unless you are able to actually reduce headcount. So I can see the need for really itemizing exactly where savings can be realized. That's very challenging. Mm-hmm. So turning to the future, Riddhit, what do you see as in the coming years, where things are going to go, and what are you excited about?
Yeah, that's a great question, David. I'm actually excited about just all the things that we talked about here, right? It's the combination of technologies and intelligence that we are talking about that ultimately lead to, hopefully better patient care, better cost management, and better throughput. If you look at the industry as a whole, we are seeing challenges. We are going to see more and more patients come through, as time goes on. But our staffing and everything that we're looking at from the hospital perspective, it is going to, probably not be as quick as the ramp up happens in the medical world. So from that perspective, I think to Stephanie's point, if we start thinking more from the perspective of what value are we bringing in with technologies, and especially I feel like technologies to win in the space need to be, just more in the background. The learning curve needs to be as short as possible. The use of technology, the use of AI and others needs to be almost seamless. I equate it to, you go to YouTube and there's so many videos out there, but when those become personalized to you, you know that these are my preferences and I can stick with them, the decision's still on me. And in the clinical world, if things start working that way, where the decision's on me, but the systems kind of know where my institution is, where I am, where my clinical decision makers are, and help optimize that workflow pathway, I think that's going to be a really interesting journey that we take. And ultimately, shifting the conversation from to the value-based care model as to why these technologies are changing my practice. So that's the way I look at it, David. That's
great. I completely relate to your YouTube comparison. 90% of what I watch is whatever it shows me to watch. But I really like your connection to the aging population and increasing need for healthcare, with technology being able to improve the throughput and the ability to deliver healthcare. I think that's a part of the conversation that we aren't necessarily focusing on, just how the system is able to deliver better care in a more efficient way and handle a lot of that burden. That's a very optimistic perspective. Kelly, what are your thoughts and areas of enthusiasm for the future?
Well, in the field of AI specifically, when we look towards the future, I think kind of next on the horizon is figuring out how to really develop high quality algorithms. So, first it was, oh, wow, we can leverage AI for this. Now people are starting to go a level deeper and figure out, how do we ensure that these models that we're building are going to result in really high quality outputs across the patient populations that they're run on? And a big focus for the FDA and for folks like BARDA, who fund a lot of these new innovations, is thinking about, how do you make sure, first of all, you have good diversity in your data sets. And there's an interesting project, it's called the Data Nutrition Project, where they've kind of taken an example from nutrition facts labels that are on the side of food and applied that towards data and analytics, where they are advocating for putting these labels to really give visibility to exactly what's under the covers in this algorithm. How is it built? What kind of data was it used on? And the conversation is still evolving. This AI conference I was at yesterday, a big focus there, and then also at the HIMSS conference a few weeks ago, was on healthcare inequities. We're getting to this point finally where kind of human society is really acknowledging and talking about how to address systemic issues kind of in our society, systemic racism, and there's a systemic problem of healthcare inequity. And that is baked into the data sets. So if you're building machine learning models off of data that's representative of a broken healthcare system, then unfortunately those machine learning models could perpetuate some of those inequities. And this is a topic that has been a really hot topic now in kind of AI circles, is starting to figure out, how do we address this? How do we make sure that we're not building machine learning models that are just going to perpetuate some of these problems? And first step is just making sure that you have a really good diverse data set. And sometimes if you have certain patient populations who are not able to access care, then you're not going to have as much data in like an average data set for some of these subpopulations. So you have to really do a lot to hunt down good data sets that represent some of these subpopulations that maybe aren't having the same access to healthcare as they should. And so then you can make sure that your machine learning model can be trained on a more representative data set. The whole conference yesterday was on this topic, and no one had great answers yet. Mm-hmm. But I was happy to see that at least the conversation has started. Everyone's recognizing that this is a problem. And so now the next task on the horizon is figure out how do we address it.
Mm-hmm. That's a really interesting, exciting conversation. I do think that, maybe on the one hand, there are underserved populations that are going to be systematically missed. But on the other hand, since you're typically working from in vitro data, people actually going to the hospital, you maybe have a better opportunity to lead the way versus clinical trials that are much more expensive to be able to actually get enough data for representation. Do you see potentially AI as, being the pioneers in this space that pharmaceutical and other types of medical technology that needs clinical trials can learn from in the future?
I think so. I mean, it's already been a topic in the pharma industry that most clinical trials in the past were all mostly white men, treating women as if they were just kind of small men, and we're not. So that conversation has already started in the pharma industry of how can we make clinical trials more representative of the total patient population that medication would be offered to. Now, AI is taking this on as, real thing that we need to address in the development of machine learning models, especially. So yeah, it could have, come about that we end up getting some good solutions to this problem in the AI world that then can be leveraged in the rest of the healthcare industry. That's my hope.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's excellent. And do you see, are you starting to see an increasing literacy around AI terminology? I know when we look at these algorithms, there's a lot of esoteric terminology around discussing the performance of the models that is really foreign to clinicians. Are we starting to see a broadening literacy around that? Is the FDA starting to provide some of that information?
I think so. I mean, I'm now working in the diagnostics industry where, it's very common for people to, be very familiar with looking at performance metrics of a diagnostics test. We're starting to see kind of more and more people starting to become more familiar with talking about specificity and, different performance metrics, area under the curve that they might want to look at when looking at different types of, tests. So I think this kind of literacy on the language of AI and machine learning is something that I've started to notice more familiarity. Like when we speak with folks at the FDA, when we speak with folks at BARDA, they now, are starting to understand more how to be a little bit more savvy in terms of scrutinizing machine learning models.
Mm-hmm. Stephanie, what are your thoughts on the future here of advanced technology?
I think, piggybacking off of Riddhit and Kelly, there's an overwhelming number of patients that are going to be needing more healthcare. The baby boomer generation is one of the largest that are retiring and on their way to, needing more and more doctor's visits. And so a lot of these, and there's more health problems in the world and in the country. And so a lot of doctors want patient engagement, and they want their patients to be involved in their prognosis and their disease state. And so one of the things I've seen really come into play is, having these devices connected to a patient's app or a patient's health fitness, and letting them know, hey, look, this is a problem. We noticed you didn't sleep well last night and you had you stopped breathing a couple times. Here's some solutions that can help you, or here's a video on this, or here's some suggested education, and contact your provider through this app. You can also talk to your doctor through this app. In Brooklyn, one of the largest healthcare systems just adopted a new patient app, which allows patients to schedule it allows patients to basically get education, to schedule their appointments, to talk to their doctors, to find out their results. And it's all, I've wanted something like that forever, access their health records. And so a lot of people are really wanting this, and even the older generation is adopting a lot of this technology.
So we're getting more connected, more personalized, more proactive, more seamless, more empowerment for the individual, and just making it easier to actually access that care. All very exciting. I see we have some questions. I want to make sure we have some time for that. Akila, do you want to share some questions with us?
Yes, I can get to some of the questions. So I think you all touched on this in different ways, but one of the questions in the Q&A from Arthi is, how do you see the growth of telehealth affecting the technologies used in healthcare?
Anyone want to take the lead on that?
I can. As I was saying earlier, because of COVID, we really didn't see a lot of the physicians. There was a lot of telehealth, a rise in telehealth appointments. And I think that it's continued even as we get beyond COVID. And as I was saying before, this healthcare system in Brooklyn has made it possible now to integrate one piece of technology in an app to be able to access all the telehealth. Some of my doctor's appointments, I get certain different links from here and there, and it'd be nice to have, one consolidated link. And I think that you're going to see more and more physicians doing telehealth, because it reduced the cost of having staff come in and having an administrative staff, really less administrative staffs to check in people. And so that's how I see it.
Great. Kelly, are you having any discussions around telehealth? Has that impacted your particular businesses?
No, we haven't had a whole lot of discussions about telehealth. Specifically, there's a lot of focus on just healthcare is moving outside of the hospital, whether it be telehealth or just, more outpatient clinics. It's a big focus for health systems. The CEO of Northwell was speaking yesterday, talking about how they have now a large percentage of their healthcare is outside of their hospitals, and they have like 800 some ambulatory and outpatient clinics. And so I think in addition to telehealth, there's just this overall move outside of the hospital, and we all need to think about what kind of implications that's going to have for companies that have historically focused on serving, inpatient market. And this is an area where I think AI again can play a big role in helping to just streamline care. Interoperability standards as well are super important there for just how do we make sure that the records are connected and everyone has access to the data they need.
So it poses some opportunity, but also challenges to really make the most of that opportunity and not create additional challenges along the way. Riddhit, are you seeing, obviously the robotic surgery itself is taking place in an institution, maybe a hospital, maybe ambulatory, but are you seeing technology limit the amount of time being spent in an institution or specifically a hospital?
Yeah, I think, when you think about technologies of this nature, it all boils down to how do you optimize the, operational expenses of care? Telehealth with, as Kelly mentioned, even in the world of telehealth, I think there are elements of, predictions that can help, again, the clinician as well as the patient just get to, an element of a solution quicker. And I think all of those ultimately help from that perspective, in the continuum of care.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Are there other questions?
Yes. One of the questions in the chat, which relates to getting care to people who need it. Oscar asks, the deployment of AI and technology platforms leverage existing pools of data to suggest what the next step should be. How do you see these platforms supporting populations who have historically shied away from healthcare due to social determinants of health?
I touched on this earlier, so I think this again comes back to recognizing that there are going to be big gaps in the data set because certain subpopulations of patients really lack the access they should have. And so first step is just figuring, specifically going out and sourcing data to make sure you can build a more diverse data set is, first step. It's not the total answer though, because there's still going to be, systemic issues built in with, unconscious bias of healthcare providers that have creeped into the way they care for those patients. So even just having the data is only one step. There's still, the data itself could still represent some inequities. And I don't have an answer to it yet. This is like a really tough problem to solve that is now kind of risen to the top of everyone's consciousness. Great. But it's something that we're definitely going to have to figure out how to crack.
But it sounds like in the more connected environment, as everybody is describing, there is a greater ability to meet them where they are and better opportunities to do that. But to your point, Kelly, if there is not a knowledge of exactly where they are or how best to reach them, there's always going to be that gap. So it sounds like there's really an opportunity. We have the tools now to grant much greater access than we have in the past, but there are still some big hurdles to getting there. Any other thoughts on that anyone would like to share?
Yeah, I mean, maybe one other thing I would add on is I'm also looking at the chats, but in the whole journey of collecting this data, I think the world is also becoming more and more aware of the compliance around data, the regulations around data, and the more support we have from regulatory bodies, the compliance bodies, and analysis of these data elements, so that we can build those models. To Kelly's point, to serve those distinct segments of population. I think that's another challenge and journey that industry and regulators need to take together to ultimately optimize that care pathway.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting point, Kelly. How are you currently interacting with the compliance, privacy, regulation aspects as it relates to data? What challenges and benefits have you seen there?
When we think about regulators, like in the US FDA, their kind of understanding of this whole field is still evolving, and their position on how to best regulate it is still evolving. And so, there are guidance documents available from the FDA that kind of try to guide vendors on, what would be considered a medical device versus a non-device, for clinical decision support, for example. However, we're seeing, even that is now already becoming stale. And, FDA's position, if you, go into a pre-sub and actually talk with them about, whether this, application of AI would be device or non-device, they're starting to more and more decide that more should be regulated, which I think is appropriate. And so I think vendors who are, kind of getting into some of these emerging technologies just have to be ready that this is kind of an ever evolving landscape, the regulations and guidelines, and you're going to need to be able to have, good dialogues with the FDA and be prepared that you might need to pivot and change your strategy. If you were maybe planning for something to be non-device, you might find out, oh, guess what? FDA has now decided they're regulating this area. We better plan, so planning ahead for that. Even if you're building a non-device product, build it as if it's going to be a regulated medical device someday, so you're not caught off guard, would be, prudent.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So plan for the most scrutiny, even if we're not quite there yet. I can see that being important. Do we have time for one more question? I know we're just about at the top of the hour.
Yeah, I think we can do one more. one that was coming in earlier was, when we're talking about healthcare, how does new technology in MedTech benefit patient engagement and especially the patient continuum of care? So we talked about bringing healthcare outside of healthcare spaces, but then how do you keep all of that data connected?
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll start, but as we discussed throughout this webinar, it's really, once we start getting all these elements of data connected and use AI to build models and so on, it really boils down to, again, the user experience of, what relevant elements of the data are you pulling in and how are you being very specific with the applications and technology we build to address it to the right stakeholder. And I think that leads to that level of connectivity where you're not waiting to have an appointment and have that, be 2 weeks later for a problem that you have right now, right here today. And being able to address that without having to go through a lot of information, but very quickly see this is the problem. Here are 3 options of recommendations that a clinician can click on and say, yep, this is going to be the right care, which reduces the amount of time you're spending. That I think Stephanie and Kelly already touched upon, but and then ultimately bringing all of that back into the intraoperative realm as you're operating or as you're providing that support to have those decision-making solutions with advanced technologies. So I think that's how you keep the patient connected throughout their journey from pre-op all the way to their recovery.
And I think it applies to the patient too. It's about giving the right information at the right time to keep them engaged, not just all the information all the time or constant nuisance. It's about providing an experience that's valuable for them. I think that's a great point. I think we're out of time, but thank you all so much. Riddhit, Kelly, Stephanie, thank you so much for your participation. It was a great discussion. Thank you everyone who joined. Sorry if we didn't have time to get to some of your questions. We will do our best to follow up and look forward to hopefully speaking soon and having everyone join again. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.